The dark-haired youth stopped the growing panic and refused a sweeping roundup of denizens. He ordered only the Naga workers to be gathered and promised not to bind the child. Some voices protested briefly, then yielded to his quiet command without further argument. A small unknown denizen asked what warrior weapon it should use and produced a tiny token. It offered the token as a warrior's weapon, and the youth accepted with a smile. The group settled into guarded relief while plans to protect the child formed. The dark-haired youth had quelled the panic and limited the roundup to the Naga workers. He accepted the tiny token and eased the group's fear as they formed plans to shield the child. Then he faced the Naga ranks and called them forward with a single command. The towering Naga kin advanced under his call. He gripped his weapon and taunted the intruders, promising they would learn the price of entering the labyrinth. The group's relief hardened into readiness as the denizens prepared to strike. The dark-haired youth had calmed the group and limited the roundup to the Naga workers. He accepted a token and steadied the survivors around the child. Naga kin advanced at his call while the group readied weapons. The panel then cut to a loud advertisement recruiting Korean translators. Bright text urged readers to join a Discord and apply. A prominent URL listed the server plainly as Asura, GG/Discord. The change of tone pulled focus and sharpened the group's urgency once more. The dark-haired youth calmed the survivors and confined the sweep to the Naga workers. He accepted a token and held Cal near the center, while Naga kin moved forward at his signal. Weapons were readied and the camp braced for contact. The moment fractured into a credit splash from Usurascan's brand, which presented the chapter title Dungeon Odyssey, staff credits, and a recruitment call. Bright text urged readers to join the Discord and apply as translators, listing the invite and web link. The abrupt advertisement sharpened the group's focus and pushed their urgency back into place. The denizens discovered a hidden snake cave and mocked the snakes as small. They argued briefly about danger and decided the snakes were not strong fighters. A chorus of voices called out Sheik and urged immediate destruction of the cave. They proclaimed they would eat the snakes and stop the digging now. Tools were raised, ranks tightened, and the mob advanced toward the cave mouth. Cries of "no more digging" rang out as they smashed in. The assault ended the panel with a tense surge at the entrance. The above-ground victors found a hidden snake cave and jeered at the Nagakin as small and harmless. They debated danger briefly and then agreed to destroy the den. Voices called out Sheik and vowed to eat the snakes and stop the digging. Tools were raised and ranks tightened as the mob advanced. Cries of "no more digging" and shouts to kill the baby snakes filled the hall. Blades fell and bodies surged forward, ending the sequence with a tense, converging assault at the cave mouth. The above-ground victors pressed their advantage and demanded a brutal proving. They shouted orders and advanced with blades and poles raised. Small denizens clustered near the entrance and trembled as the mob closed ranks. A concealed trap snapped open beneath them, and spears thrust upward into the crowd. Bodies fell and blood stained the threshold while weapons clattered. Survivors scattered and cries choked into silence. When the dust settled, one wounded denizen sat trembling beside a fallen pole. An attacker leaned in and asked if the massacre had satisfied them. The cloaked figure loomed over the wounded denizen after the threshold massacre and delivered a steady stream of cruelty. It declared the denizen born to die and taunted that small bodies either were eaten or became like their attackers. The figure ordered the denizen to stretch, as if testing obedience. The denizen complied, stretching repeatedly while fear and confusion warped its face. The figure's voice stayed calm as a pale mandible fell into view near the denizen's mouth. The denizen flinched and choked, trapped between shock and the demand to obey. The cloaked figure loomed over the wounded denizen and demanded obedience. A pale mandible sat near the denizen's mouth. The denizens rallied with panic and anger and called to protect Tech. Cavern leaders urged retreat while others prepared to stand and fight. One leader raised a curved blade and the crowd braced around Tech. A desperate voice declared it would eat the marble to stop them. Steel flashed and a strike tore through bodies and stone. Blood splattered the hall and denizens fled in every direction. A young woman screamed Dominic's name as she watched the chaos unfold. The cloaked figure had already demanded obedience, and the hall broke into violence. Blood slicked an ear in the nearest panel as a wounded person stood silent. Armored labyrinth masters moved down a vertical shaft in measured waves to seize control. Small denizens scattered and climbed across the beams. One guardian struck, and a body fell through open space toward the floor. The impact blew dust and debris outward and sent denizens tumbling. Voices rose and a woman screamed Dominic's name as the assault closed around the wounded, and the captors pressed their advantage. The group watched a bright orb descend through a column of smoke while denizens scattered across the beams. A small pink denizen seized the sphere and cried for freedom for its kin as others pointed and reached. A cloaked guardian moved into view and struck. A heavy impact landed nearby. Debate flared among leaders about puncturing the core, one warning it self-repaired and another fearing harm to Cal. Tension tightened as hands closed on weapons, and urgent voices clashed over the next move. A denizen chastised itself for handling the bright sphere clumsily near the fallen. Dark-haired youth waved a weapon and said there was no need for extra caution. They walked among broken bodies and noted the denizens were weaker than expected. Voices argued that the labyrinth walls remained dangerous despite the enemy's weakness. A figure bent down and nudged a corpse, revealing a writhing nest hidden beneath skin. The mass erupted and tore into the pile, turning relief into sudden violence. Dark-haired youth and young girl traded a short remark at the tunnel mouth. They moved down a descending corridor likened to the lower levels of crags. Broken stone steps funneled them into thicker shadow and tight rock walls. A purple spectral presence spoke from deep darkness without showing a face. The cloaked figure sat before it and considered ownership and ignorance aloud. The figure knelt and apologized while the voice assigned duties and care. It mentioned Naga denizens and ordered someone to take responsibility for them. The group listened, paused, and prepared to obey the command moving forward. The group had paused at the corridor mouth and waited. The cloaked figure spoke first and questioned, leaving a war to a mere mercenary. A purple disembodied voice answered and taunted the cloaked figure, recalling a dragon's descendant and the mercenary's value. The voice argued that stale blood could still guard a weak labyrinth. A great reptilian eye then opened in the dark. The presence said it would finally be able to see and called the scene a nice sight. The group had paused at the corridor mouth and waited as voices traded barbs. The cloaked figure questioned, leaving a war to a mere mercenary. A purple disembodied voice taunted and recalled a dragon's descendant. A great reptilian eye opened in the dark and regarded them. Then the page shifted to a stark announcement on a dark field. Large text declared recruitment for Korean translators and urged applicants to join Discord. It supplied the link as a Sura, GG/Discord, and displayed the Usura Scans brand emblem. The banner read plainly and broke the tense scene with practical direction. Readers saw the emblem and link and then returned to the dark corridor. The group had stopped at the corridor mouth while voices traded sharp barbs. The cloaked figure questioned, leaving a war to a mere mercenary, and held a guarded posture. A purple disembodied voice taunted them and recalled a dragon descendant. A great reptilian eye opened in darkness and fixed on the group. The page then flipped to a stark black banner. Large text announced recruitment for Korean translators and provided a Discord invite with Usura Scans branding. The abrupt recruitment notice broke the corridor's tension and drew readers briefly away from the dark scene. The group had halted at the corridor mouth while voices traded sharp barbs. The cloaked figure questioned, leaving a war to a mercenary, and held a guarded posture. A purple disembodied voice taunted them and recalled a dragon descendant. A great reptilian eye opened in darkness and fixed on the group. The page flicked to a stark recruitment banner for Korean translators and a Discord invite, breaking the corridor's tension. Faces turned back to the threat. Leaders argued over urgent defenses as someone shouted NAGAS and armored Naga denizens advanced on command. The Labyrinth masters proclaimed a new chapter while an armored herald displayed trophies. The cloaked figure held a guarded posture and questioned leaving the fighting to mercenaries. A purple labyrinth voice taunted them and referenced a dragon descendant. A giant reptilian eye opened in the dark and fixed on the group. The page abruptly cut to Usurascan's brand recruitment art and a Discord invite, breaking the corridor's tension. Faces turned back to the threat as leaders argued defenses and issued commands. Someone shouted NAGAS, and Naga kin in armor advanced at their orders. The dark-haired youth entered the cramped command room and faced the older soldier. They spoke in low, clipped sentences about limits and whether he could go outside. The older soldier sat with maps and bandages and said he had no reports. The youth insisted he was ready and asked if there was space to deploy. The soldier hesitated, then pointed to a blank slot on the board and sighed. Their exchange ended without orders as the youth waited patiently for permission. The dark-haired youth walked into the cramped command room and confronted the older soldier. They spoke in clipped sentences about leaving and money. The older soldier checked maps and bandages and said he had no field reports. The youth insisted he could go and asked if a deployment slot existed. The soldier studied the board, sighed, and pointed at a blank slot. He did not give formal orders. The youth waited calmly while the soldier hesitated. No one spoke for several long breaths. The dark-haired youth entered and resumed his request to join a deployment slot. The older soldier set a folded map on the desk and began to explain the assignment. He sketched dungeon levels and pointed to a marked Zone 5. He warned that Zone 5 sent teams deeper into lethal floors with scarce exits. He flipped through portraits and named various available fighters and specialists without ceremony. The youth watched each face as the soldier listed strengths and likely risks. Cal and a small cohort listened from the room edge, quiet and attentive. After a long silence, the soldier left the decision implied but unsigned. The dark-haired youth returned and renewed his request to join a deployment slot. The older soldier spread a folded map and traced the assignment zones, pointing to a marked Zone 5 that sent teams deeper into lethal floors with scarce exits. He flipped through portraits and listed available fighters and specialists without ceremony. The youth studied each face while Cal and a small cohort listened at the room edge. The soldier left the choice unmade and implied. The youth then asked if there was room. The soldier produced a small plastic ID card and held it up. They exchanged terse questions about credentials and assignment rules. The youth realized selection was imminent. A small crowd gathered and shouted a blessing as the chosen prepared to leave. Small denizens stepped forward and vowed the departing fighters would be remembered as legends. The young girl wept while the dark-haired youth remained composed and watched the path. The older soldier offered a brief nod, and the group filed through the arch into the hall. They reached a round chamber that held a raised stone pedestal beneath a single shaft of light. A large smooth egg rested there and caught every glint from the shaft. The chosen drew close and stared without speaking as the light shimmered across the shell. The crowd blessed the chosen as they left and filed through the arch into the hall. They entered a round chamber with a raised stone pedestal beneath a single shaft of light. A large smooth egg rested on the pedestal and caught every glint of the shaft. After a long, quiet pause, the dark-haired youth stepped forward and asked a question. A green serpentine denizen turned and answered, its tone low and direct. Faces tightened when Dominic's name was spoken, and the young girl bowed her head and replied obediently. The chosen left the chamber and stood under the shaft of light a final time before moving on. They had faced the egg and heard the serpentine answer. Faces tightened when Dominic's name was spoken, and the young girl bowed her head. The group then found a jagged tear in the wall. The cloaked figure stepped forward and identified that gap as the portal they had come through. The guardian asked if the portal's opening could be adjusted and waited, as the bright void offered no reply. The chosen left the chamber and stood under the shaft of light once more before they moved on. They had faced the egg and heard the serpentine answer. Faces tightened when Dominic's name was spoken, and the young girl bowed her head. The group found a jagged tear in the wall. The cloaked figure stepped forward and identified that gap as the portal they had come through. The guardian asked if the portal's opening could be adjusted and waited, as the bright void offered no reply. The scene then broke for a full-page recruitment ad from Usura Scans. The bright banner urged Korean translators to join their Discord at Asura, GG/Discord. The chosen left the chamber and stood beneath the shaft of light again before moving on. They had confronted the egg and heard the serpentine reply. Faces tightened when Dominic's name passed between them, and the young girl bowed her head. They discovered a jagged tear in the wall. The cloaked figure stepped forward and named the gap the portal they had used. The guardian asked if the opening could be changed, but the bright void offered no answer. The scene then shattered into a full-page recruitment banner urging Korean translators to join Usura Scan's Discord. The group gathered beneath the PAJU GYSER gate and listened to a brisk briefing. A woman counted available slots while soldiers and survivors watched. The older soldier observed faces as numbers fell and resolve hardened. The briefing concluded, and the commander ordered the expedition team to enter. Helmets buckled and shoulders squared as the gate mechanism engaged. The gate opened with a grinding shudder, and the first team stepped forward into the light. Whispered mentions of Dominic drifted through the crowd without response. After the gate had opened and the first team stepped forward, the commander named the starting squad and ordered them to move quickly. A woman hefted a heavy blade as soldiers advanced into the dim corridor. A whip-tailed lizard leapt and seized a soldier, prompting frantic cries. Troops identified the creature and warned its tongue was blocked and its tail dangerous. Leaders called for suppressive fire and directed shooters to target the armpit and front leg, not the back. The squad steadied weapons and pressed onward under tense, shouted orders. After the gate opened, the commander named the starting squad and urged haste. She hefted a blade and ordered formation and target zones, while two young soldiers exchanged nervous words. A whip-tailed lizard lunged and seized a soldier by the torso, sending the group into alarms and shouts. Leaders called for suppressive fire and directed shooters to hit the armpit and front leg, not the back. The female commander barked to aim for the wounds, and the squad fired. The denizen slashed and the soldier fell motionless. Another voice confirmed he was dead. The female commander examined the recruits and praised the dark-haired youth's apparent skill. She offered him a blade and outlined his immediate role in the squad. He accepted the weapon but hesitated before answering her direct question. When pressed, he stated the situation plainly and called the raid a sad thing. The female commander listened and softened her expression, reminding him not to worry. Other squad members watched in silence as orders settled and the group prepared. A faint resolve passed between them before they stepped toward the dark corridor. After the female commander had handed a blade to the dark-haired youth, she eased the squad's tension. He accepted the weapon but delivered a blunt assessment of the raid. Orders settled as soldiers exchanged quiet looks and readied their gear together. A tense calm spread across the firelit camp as people checked equipment. Then a voice cried out from the perimeter and drew immediate attention. A recruit shouted and pointed. Recruits and children looked toward the sound. Some laughed wearily at the false alarm, while others hurried to investigate. The camp's resolve held as they prepared to step into darkness again. At the camp, the squad argued over pay and scarce supplies before the next raid. A young recruit calculated their share and voiced disbelief at the meager reward. Soldiers traded worried glances as others recounted missing rations and the thin supply list. The female commander listened and offered terse reassurances, while the dark-haired youth held a blade and remained watchful. The tension eased only slightly as people checked gear and prepared to move. Then a panicked voice cried, "Boss," from the perimeter. Several soldiers sprinted toward the shout, while leaders snapped orders and braced the squad. A panicked shout pulled the camp into motion, and soldiers sprinted toward the perimeter. Reports came back that bodies lay spread and would not move while suspended in the air. The female commander barked orders and readied the squad. Dark-haired youth held a blade and scanned the dark tunnel mouths. People fumbled their gear and eyes searched for motion. A leader called for Yungti to bring the flares and prepare to expose whatever hung beyond the light. Yungti launched flares that arced into the void and briefly revealed the motionless forms. A panicked shout had pulled the camp into motion, and soldiers sprinted toward the perimeter. Yungti launched flares that arced into the void and briefly revealed the motionless forms. The light showed a mass of limbs and pale faces hung in the cavern's red glare. The crowd gasped when one suspended figure became clearly human to all. Faces turned sharp with both fear and sudden anger toward that single human. The female commander ordered withdrawal and told the squad to regroup immediately. A soldier shouted Junyoung's name to warn him of movement behind him. Junyoung spun and met a sudden heavy strike erupting from the thick darkness. He tumbled hard under the blow as the entire squad braced for combat. A panicked shout sent the camp into motion, and Yungti fired flares that briefly lit a mass of pale suspended bodies. Faces hardened when one figure proved human, and the female commander ordered immediate withdrawal. A soldier shouted Junyoung's name as movement struck from the dark. A camouflaged attacker hit him hard, and he tumbled. Soldiers shouted camouflage and flanking maneuvers. A lizard-like denizen lunged and seized a panicked man. The flares sputtered and began to die, so Yungti launched more into the void. Sparks traced the ceiling as the squad braced for hand-to-hand combat in gloom. Flares sputtered and cast a red glare that revealed a falling swarm of spider denizens. The squad locked shields into a tight wall and planted their feet on the floor. Huge legs arced above them as dozens of spider bodies dropped from the ceiling. One soldier stepped forward with a blade and faced the descending mass alone. Other soldiers readied spears and braces while the flares burned low and sputtered. Sparks traced the ceiling above the phalanx as the squad held position. The red light sharpened every looming limb and tension tightened in the ranks. Flares sputtered and threw red light across the squad's tight shield wall. Dozens of spider bodies dropped from the ceiling and legs arced over them. One soldier stepped forward with a blade while others braced with spears. Sparks traced the ceiling as the phalanx held position and tension tightened. Then the narrative cut away to a stark recruitment notice on a dark page. It urged Korean translators to join the group's Discord at Asura, GG/Discord. A small cloaked figure icon occupied the banner's corner and reinforced the branding. After the flare-lit skirmish, the sequence cut to a stylized title spread. The cloaked figure filled the right panel with white eyes and a torn banner below. Dungeon Odyssey appeared across the banner with a circled 10 at the edge. The left card showed the left duo portrait above the Asura Scans brand and a Discord link. Jagged tags listed translators, proofreaders, and staff roles across the page. The layout read like a recruitment poster. A cloaked icon repeated in the corner and emphasized the group's identity while the story waited to resume. After the title spread, the sequence returned to the chamber. Cal faced a towering spider with red eyes. He looked up and grinned with quiet resolve. He climbed a jutting column and leapt toward the beast. Midair, he flung a round object that struck the spider's face. The impact staggered the creature and legs scuttled. Close-ups showed his grin and the spider's mandibles. The layout emphasized each beat with vertical panels and harsh lighting. Sound effects and motion lines punctuated the toss and the strike. Cal landed and braced with a spear as the spider recoiled for another strike. After the title, the sequence returned to the chamber under harsh lighting. Cal climbed a jutting column and leapt toward the spider's red eyes. Midair, he flung a round object that struck the creature's face and shattered its exoskeleton. Segments and rock tumbled as the spider convulsed and lost its head. The body slumped and sank into shadow while motion lines marked each beat. Cal landed and braced with a spear, gaze steady. An off-screen voice said, "All right." Another speaker named Young-ho and mentioned cleanup before the panel cut. Cal's strike had smashed the spider's face, and the detached head thudded away into shadow. Motion marked the corpse as it convulsed and slumped. Voices off-screen barked orders and mentioned cleanup while the group steadied. A soldier called Clumsy tumbled into the pit, and the spider's remaining limbs lashed out. The creature seized him, spun, and flung him high. He shouted and flailed as he sailed through the chamber. At the rim, a hand closed on a small piece of gear as others prepared to respond. Cal's strike had smashed the spider's face, and the detached head thudded into shadow. The corpse convulsed and slumped, while voices nearby barked orders about cleanup. A soldier tumbled into the pit as the spider's remaining limbs lashed out. The creature seized him, spun, and flung him high through the chamber. At the rim, a hand closed on a small piece of gear while others braced. A nearby figure lunged with a blade and struck a swift, clean arc. Soldiers shouted questions and watched as the fight kept shifting inside the pit. The spider's shattered head rolled as Cal's strike echoed across the pit. The corpse convulsed and slumped while multiple monsters lashed their limbs from below. An expedition squad soldier fell and was seized, then spun across the chamber. At the rim, a hand closed on a lost flare while others braced. A nearby fighter lunged and cut a clean arc through a webbed limb. Soldiers shouted and braced as the fight kept shifting inside the pit. Then a hush fell as a figure emerged bathed in red armor. Someone whispered he's level 7, and faces turned toward the cloaked figure. After Cal's strike shattered the spider, the pit had convulsed and monsters lashed upward. A soldier fell and was grabbed, then spun across the chamber. At the rim, hands closed on lost flares as others braced. Fighters cut webbed limbs and shouted. The fight shifted until a red-armored figure rose and silence followed. Someone whispered that he was level 7, and heads turned to the cloaked figure. The survivors regrouped at the rim and spoke in low voices. They admitted fear and joked about being warmed up. A masked soldier cradled a swaddled infant and muttered no. Eyes tightened on the unknown guardian. After the initial fight, the survivors inspected the fallen spiders and their webbed carcasses. They debated classification and agreed the creatures matched a related species despite odd features. A soldier noted the spider's camouflage and warned the group to stay alert. Hands searched the webbing at the rim and found a thick rope of silk. They traced the strand toward the dark and discussed the risk of following it. Voices grew low until someone shouted to draw attention deeper in the hall. After inspecting the webbed corpses, the survivors traced a thick silk strand into the hall's dark. Voices had fallen low as they debated following it when red eyes flared from the shadows. Dark-haired youth perceived murderous intent and warned the group. Soldiers exchanged terse questions about baiting the threat and who would call out. A voice remarked on the smell and challenged why no one had lured it yet. The team weighed the risk and braced for action. Lights and weapons moved into ready positions as the hall held a tense silence. They had followed Silk and watched red eyes in the dark, voices low while they argued who would bait the thing. The dark-haired youth had warned about murderous intent and cautioned restraint. A soldier then dismissed it as a microscopic bug, and the group laughed uneasily. The denizen responded with a piercing cry, then revealed a gaping, fanged mouth and tore into a nearby man. Blood fell, chaos erupted, and screams snapped the squad to action. Lights swung, weapons rose, and voices ordered a retreat as the hall filled with frantic motion. The squad had followed Silk and argued who would bait the thing. A denizen had lunged and torn into a man, and chaos had spread. A hooded figure screamed that it was a web spider and stumbled back. Blood splattered the stone as the thing struck again. The figure's expression slackened, and dark streaks ran down their face. A fanged maw then unfolded above them and filled the frame. Teeth gleamed in the dim light. The hall filled with a deeper terror, and retreat began. The expedition squad had followed Silk and argued whose name would bait the thing. A denizen lunged and tore into a man, and chaos spread through the hall. A cloaked figure screamed web spider and stumbled as blood splattered the stone. Their expression slackened, and dark streaks ran down their face. A fanged maw unfolded above them, and teeth gleamed in dim light. The hall filled with deeper terror, and retreat began in earnest. A final crunch echoed as the denizen's bite closed and silence followed. A branded banner at the floor's edge marked the panel as translated. The expedition squad had chased Silk and argued over which name would bait the creature. A denizen had lunged and ripped into a man, and chaos spread through the hall. A cloaked figure had screamed about web spiders as blood splattered the stone. A fanged maw had opened above them, retreat followed, and a final crunch had fallen into silence. The scene had then cut to a translated page marker, and a bright recruitment banner for translators from Usurascans appeared, interrupting the horror with an online invite.